I made a variant of chess called Secret Queen, where, as the name suggests, each player selects a pawn to secretly behave as a queen. As you can see on screen, the black queen captures the king, but from white's perspective, it looks like the pawn went haywire and got its promotion early. I was inspired by a video I watched by Anna Cramling, playing this variant against super grandmaster Fabiano Caruana. I was so hooked by this idea, I went to chess.com to go and play it, but to my dismay, it wasn't there. So, just like anyone else would have done, I decided that I would make the entire game myself from scratch. Before even starting to make chess, the first thing I had to do was create a server to communicate with. I decided my first task would be to get a little chat box working so two people could send messages to each other. This actually ended up being the perfect prototype because similar to chess, two people take turns to send each other messages. Later on, all I had to do was replace the text with the chess move, which wouldn't take a lot of time. This was also my first time attempting to make a server, but after a little YouTube and Googling, I managed to get it working pretty quickly. My next course of action was to get a chessboard up and running. I figured the easiest solution would be to hardcode the chessboard with enums, so each number would represent a different piece. Then, I would create a function to analyze the number given and render its corresponding piece. After that was done, I needed to try and move the pieces. I came up with a two-step system whereby the first click would indicate the piece selected and the second would indicate its destination. However, at this point, the pieces could fly anywhere over the board and even capture its own pieces. But that didn't matter to me at the moment. I was more concerned about flipping the board for black's turn. Now, you may be thinking, that's pretty easy, you just have to flip the coordinates that are representing each square. And you'd be right, but I was convinced it would be such a difficult task that it took me a little over 4 hours to figure it out. I was overthinking it and reversing literally everything in my code except for the coordinates. It wasn't a total waste of time though. I managed to refactor my code a little and fix a few bugs that went unnoticed. After I got the board to flip,
D4. Yes! D4 here as well. Oh my god! Yes! Yes!
I had one more task to finish before working on the Secret Queen, which was retrieving the legal moves of each piece. I made an array of functions which would return the legal moves of its respective piece. The first piece I started with was the pawn, because I figured it would be the easiest, which it was not. In fact, I ended up taking the same amount of time to finish all the minor pieces as I did to finish the pawn. Getting the pawn to move forward was pretty straightforward, and even captures and the queen promotion was easy. The tedious part was solving en passant. For this move, I needed to retrieve my opponent's previous move, check if it was double pushed, directly beside my pawn, then allow the capture of the pawn. However, that wasn't the difficult part. The difficult part was removing the opponent's pawn after being captured. You see, before this, the piece would just go to the square it was allowed to. So, if a piece was there, it would disappear automatically. However, for en passant, the destination square is not the same as the square in which the enemy piece is captured. So I needed to globally check if en passant had occurred and manually remove the pawn that was supposed to be captured. After a ton of inefficient coding, I managed to get en passant to work. I decided to do the king next, since it was the simplest piece in the game. It just had to go one square in any direction. Until I remembered about castling, but I decided to hold that until the end. Next, I got to work on the knight. The knight may seem like a difficult piece to code because of its unusual nature, but it was actually the easiest one for me to do. All I needed was to check if its letter and number changed by 2 and 1 or vice versa respectively. Since it could hop over pieces, I didn't have to concern myself with blocking moves, which was extremely convenient. After that, I worked on the rook and bishop, which were both around the same. First, I check its vision sideways or diagonally using a for loop. Then, if a piece is in the way, I break out of the loop. If the piece was of the opposite color, I add it to the list of legal moves before breaking. So the last thing I had to do was castling, but since I had already dealt with another special move, en passant, I just copied the same idea. Move the king, then manually swap the rook's position on the board. And voila, I had finished making chess. Now I just needed to let the user select the secret queen. First, I check if the game had started. If it hadn't, I'll wait until the user selects a pawn and change it to a queen. It might seem like that's all I have to do, but there was actually quite a bit more I had to deal with. For example, if the secret queen goes to the final rank, it will promote to a queen, just like a pawn would. So I needed to track its square the entire game, and disallow pawn promotions for it. After that, I made a few finishing touches, and just like that, I had a fully fledged chess variant I was super proud of. Even though the code is admittedly pretty bad, I think the game works well considering it only took me a week to figure everything out.